Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. You would think life can't get any worse until it does. Our next guest had already lost his 12-year-old son to a tragic four-wheeler accident. Now, in the midst of the recession, he was going to prison for his involvement in the savings and loan crash. When his son died, he faced nearly insurmountable grief, or what he refers to as broken heart syndrome. Tragedy and tough times will quickly show you the depth of your friendships, he explains. Life and reality can be harsh. He says that fear is often the greatest threat to our passion. Faith senses God is leading you in a new direction and is calling your name. Fear changes its role from an advocate of our safety to the greatest threat stopping us from experiencing God's purpose in our life. Fear to pursue the call when it doesn't make sense. Rick Unruh is a pastor, teacher, counselor, speaker, and former prisoner. He started the Dream Again Counseling Center, earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in counseling. He works at Mission America Placement Services out of Wichita, Kansas. He and his wife have 3 sons, one they lost in a tragic accident. You can read more about him at Rick Unruh, that's UNRUH.net. Joining us now to talk about his new book, Self-Surrender, The Key to Dreaming Again, is Rick Unruh. Rick, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it greatly.
Rick, this is a story of a heartbreaking story, one that even the strongest of faith would be rattled, shattered, and broken. Somewhere in your life you had a foundation built, a foundation stone, a cornerstone, a capstone, maybe even the ground floor of faith laid out for you that ultimately would come into play in this navigation through the ups and downs, the agonies and the ecstasies. Take me back in time to little Rick, growing up in his hometown, growing up in his home. Were there faith lessons? Were there people that you looked at? Were there people that mentored you? Were there people that were speaking into your life? How did this faith journey become not your parents' faith journey, not your pastor's faith journey, but how did it become your own faith journey?
You know, I was very blessed with as my lineage immigrated over, that my grandparents and his brothers and sisters were involved in starting one of the first churches in my hometown, and that carried down on to my father and my mother, who were incredible Christian people and great inspiration to me. So from an early age, as you know, many were, we were in church every time it was open, every revival service, whatever that meant. We were always there. And so that foundation was a very strong one, was being laid. You know, I had a great, in so many ways, you know, it's never perfect, but I had a great childhood with a dad that was, you know, very hardworking, very successful, and a mother who just loved people, was always involved in the church, loved working with the youth, had an incredible sense of humor. And so really that foundation was laid. I remember just as a young child, I can't pinpoint the day now, but accepting Christ. And by the time I was in junior high, just knew that God had a call on my life. So a very, you know, solid, strong foundation.
So you had this even from junior high, you knew who the Messiah was, and you had a personal relationship with him. And you were no longer riding on the coattails of mom and dad. You were joining them, not being taken to church. You were joining them to go to church because it was a part of your life now.
Absolutely.
So life has its accomplishments. You graduate high school. What do you do? Did you maintain your faith walk through high school? Did you maintain your faith walk after high school?
Yeah, and you know, as every Christian at home, I love what you say. Did you find your own faith? Because you know, we've been around long enough to see people that were relying on mom and dad's faith, and and that causes the up and down. And for me, I realized it was a great transition that it became real. Was it was no longer, hey, would you like to go to this party with us? And my response would be, my mom and dad won't let me. To rather, no, I don't. Now your response, because it's a personal relationship you have now. No, I don't think that's in my best interest. No, I don't want to go. Now you start taking for yourself. And so by my senior year, I had just radically sold out for God and was on fire for Him. Youth groups exploding. I'm starting to preach even a little bit in our youth group. We got 100 plus in a smaller, town. And so it was really becoming real, becoming personal. Super excited about the call that God had on my life and what all life was going to have. So yeah, it became very personal. I really felt that, especially my senior year, really became when I decided to take a stand for what I believed.
So senior year comes. Have you met the girl of your dreams yet? Have you met your high school sweetheart, or is that yet to come?
She was a key turning point because I did go through my junior year some serious rebellion, and I went to church camp that year and met her, and it really became a life changer. But in God's divine appointments, ironically, I went through church camp still just kind of playing games. I knew how to go down to the altar. I'd been in church. I knew how to do that type of stuff. But because she lived in the hometown where the camp was, and I wanted to go back and see her, I went back the following week, and we went out to the campgrounds because we had friends out there through the years that were at the second week. And, that the evangelist, I don't remember who he was, asked everyone to come down front. And I remember sitting in the back. Well, I'm a guest, so I really don't have to, I don't have to go down. I'm a guest. I'm not expected. And I said, oh, well, I know how to play the game. I'll go down. And literally walking halfway down to that altar with my heart still very hardened, the Holy Spirit hit me, and I literally took off running to the altar to cry out to God. And that was my junior year, that summer going into my senior year, that God placed an incredible woman in my life that played a key role of really igniting what God had in store for me.
So after graduation, kind of give me a little bit of a snippet of the timeline of graduation into the business world and how those events laid out.
And I'll say, as part of my senior year, in the midst of this great, really senior year, really everything's going great. I find out my mother has cancer, and many people listening, or you walk that journey of cancer and the ups and downs. But she was just an incredible woman of faith. It didn't, she just stayed so true and just breathed life back into us. And so we go, I graduate. On to Central Bible College to pursue the call that God has on my life. And in between my sophomore and junior year, I was then married to Tamala, who I'd met at church camp 3 years prior. And my mom's health was doing great. Life seemed to be back on track. And after we were married, and by the time we come home for Christmas, my mom's health is just gone down rapidly. And that was, she was, as I look back, I had my own faith, but she was such a rock. She would never let you talk, negative, or that God wasn't going to touch her, that God's not in control. I mean, people would walk into the hospital room to, want to bring her encouragement, and they're the ones leaving encouraged. She was just that type of person. She knew how to light up a room. She always knew how to bring fun into it. And, when I lost her, I didn't understand it at the time because I went back to Bible college, travel as evangelist, but I really allowed a seed of doubt to be planted at that time because, and again, it was small. And again, the enemy, all he needs is a little kink, something a little small that I really wouldn't understand years later what had taken place. But so we deal with that tragedy. My wife's pregnant with our first child. So she's dealing with major health issues with preeclampsia, and So we lost my mom. I'm grieving. We're newlyweds. We got a child on the way, and life got crazy in a hurry. And that's kind of all in my junior year of college. That everything really kind of went crazy there for a little bit as we tried to weather that storm.
As you look back on, and we haven't talked about the future circumstances, but I want to pause here for a minute and kind of examine. Do you see this as a season now, as you look backwards, of trials and as James talks about, count it as all things as good, every problem, every challenge that comes your way that builds perseverance, and that's going to strengthen your faith. Do you think that this came to you at you rapid fire because God was preparing you for what lie ahead? You couldn't possibly know what was going to lie ahead, but the fact that this came in this burst of three, that's how God does things, in threes. And so here you have three very specific events taking place that were going to be mirrored again in the future with three other circumstances that would reshape your life. And so do you now in retrospect kind of look and see, oh, I was being, it wasn't on the curriculum that the Bible college printed out, but it certainly was on the curriculum that God printed out. I always like to talk to authors about this view of seeing something that they hadn't seen. Maybe you had seen it, but maybe now you'll look at it just kind of a little bit different in the narrative of the story as to how God was already and how He was already at work in your life, shaping you and preparing you so that you could endure what was to come. So you have your first child. I just had my first grandchild, and my daughter was preeclamptic. So the baby comes quickly after you're diagnosed with preeclampsia. You got just about 48 hours before they start either induce or C-section, and you've got a child. And so here you are. This is what, your junior year?
Well, I'll be in my junior summer, heading now into my senior year. So, but she's pregnant during that junior year, yes.
Okay, and so mom passes. You're going through this situation with your wife's health because it is a threat to your wife's health. That's part of the condition, and you have a baby. So what happens now?
Well, we go back to school, finish my senior year. We're just believing and trusting God that, each step of the way. The next 5 years, I traveled as an evangelist, traveling, holding revivals. Was blessed to do some youth camps, statewide youth camps in different districts, and it was an exciting time. But traveling, we had two boys, the third one on the way. That becomes very whole different element to it. Financially, it was just, extremely always tough. And, at that point, after 5 years, and decided that, maybe we'd take a secular job in the family business, but to get some things in line, figured it may be, 1 to 2 years type of deal, continue to travel and, just see where that goes. And that lasted way, way longer than we'd ever anticipated.
So here you now, your third child is born. You now have 3 sons. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a third one. Yeah,
the third son, 3 sons, and your 5 years. You come off the road. You join the family business. And what's the family business?
My dad had a motel and restaurant that he had started, and again, he was just old farm boy that was raised with his parents that immigrated and homesteaded, and he always kind of had that entrepreneurial spirit, and God just really blessed him through the years, and so became a part of that and figured it was short term.
And short term turned into how long?
10 years.
10 years. All right,
yeah.
So your youngest is now, or your oldest is 15.
Yeah, it'd be at the time when that happened, 14, 12, and 9.
14.
And
Okay,
we
so
stayed
14.
there. Yeah, but we stayed there about one more year before we moved
Gotcha.
after the accident. So,
Okay.
um,
So the 12-year-old, the middle child, is the one who was out four-wheeling, and kind of take us back to that day. What was going on? A day like any other day?
yeah, it was the boys were out of school. Grandpa had just had the four-wheeler fixed, and they'd been out riding four-wheelers out at his house all day. Our high school football team had a big game that night with state implications, and my middle son had really gone. He had a lot of his friends had older brothers playing on the team, so even the road games he had been at just because going with his friends. And but the four wheelers are fixed, so he wanted to stay at home and continue to ride. And so it just seemed like a normal day. They were out riding. They come into my dad's restaurant. I have lunch with them, and they head back out to ride again. That night, we're standing at the my wife and I and our youngest boy went ahead and went to the game, and we're standing there, and I tell people my dad had to make two phone calls that no dad ever wants to make. One about my mom, um, and then this phone call that still rings in my ears as I answer that phone. And he said, "Rick, there's been an accident, and I think your son Landon is dead."
I
Just
can't.
remember
Yeah.
screaming no as loud as I could. That doesn't happen to us. It only happens to other people, other towns, and here we are right in the middle of it.
Here you are, the worst news. Even in the Bible, there's so few references to a father losing a son. We see Jacob's response to hearing the news about Joseph, as false as it may be, it's real to him, and his response. And interestingly enough, we see God's same response when Jesus breathed his last. He responds the exact same way, and he tears his garment. The veil is torn from top to bottom. But we don't read a lot about, we know King David and his son Absalom, and the grief, the profound expression of grief from King David, so much so that his men came to him and said, "You're grieving so loud, so strong, so violently that we get the feeling that you wish that all of us would have died and he would have lived." And that was a turning point for King David to kind of move towards not acceptance or reconciliation. There's never grief is something that there's an organization called Compassionate Friends, and they get together and they talk about the fact that this is something that you can function, you can operate in the world, but it never goes away. It's until you're reunited again in the kingdom of heaven. You really don't understand those words that Jesus said when he lifted that cup and he said, "I will not drink this cup anew with you again. I will not drink from this cup with you again until I drink it anew with you in the kingdom of heaven." And that's what you are looking forward to with your son. So this has to be processed. You have to go through the process of making arrangements, of deciding on what to do. Where's God and who is God to you now?
Then that whole grieving process, there's lots of emotions. You can be all over the place. Um, there's moments when you're trying to do the right thing in James, and okay, God, my heart's broken, but surely good comes out of this. And then there's times you're just all out angry at him. How could you let this happen? Where's that hedge of protection we prayed around our children? Not only with my 12-year-old, but my 14-year-old son who was with him during the accident and had to go get help,
Mm.
and the tough road that he would have to walk and the nightmares that he would have to face. And as a father, I mean, you want to protect your children from that. I would have rather it been me have to do that. As hard as that would have been, I would take that for my son not to have to face that. So now we're dealing with multiple dynamics here of trying to figure out our own grief, trying to figure out God within our, where does God play a role in this, and the anger and bitterness, and yet I love him, and back and forth. And now you got children who, are angry at God and what they had to see and all of that. So there's just so much going on. Um, Again, I, one of the things, they talk about grief, on the first things being denial. And I mean, it happened, but it still really hasn't sunk in. And I think that's a gift from God, because if we really understood at that moment the full impact of everything we were going to face, and the children and the marriage and all of that, it could too much to bear at that moment, and it's still a ton to bear at any moment.
Well, it is. You write in the book that your son's tragic accident really kind of triggered an emotional tailspin, and made you move in ways that were emotionally driven, soulishly driven, not spiritually driven. And actually brought about a change in your employment, and kind of led you to a new job opportunity. And what was that, to try to create a new beginning, start over? If you had to continue to face, your dad and the family business, it was just another reminder. So this is when you made a change?
So it was, I mean, 6, 7, 8 months later, we start thinking that it was almost a little shy of a year when we actually made the move. But that let's start fresh. You don't know, and of course I've done a lot of grief research, a lot of grief studies. I've led grief groups, and we're launching some grief workshops and stuff. And it's one thing they say: just stay pat, and let things absorb. But we jumped and moved, with that, and it was that idea of, maybe this would be a fresh start, because yeah, every memory, every ball field you drive by, every park, those are all triggers where you can be having an okay day, and all of a sudden you see a picture or you see one of those things, and you tailspin right back into the depths of darkness. And every grieving person faces those throughout their time. And so, and I think sometimes we become weary of it, like, Lord, how many ups and downs can I take? Because we start feeling a little ray of hope. Maybe I'm getting better. And then boom, we're right back down in the bottom. And so it's such a long and hard and frustrating journey, to mix your faith into that and try to understand God in the midst of this, darkness that you're facing. It's a brutal time. So fresh start was really what we thought we were doing.
But yet you still struggled with the dark night of the soul, that this kept coming back up, no matter what. There was no escape, and there was never going to be an escape. And you've come to find that out, that it is part of the whole picture. It's part of the portrait. You can't erase it. It's always going to be there. So you take a job in the savings and loan and the home finance business, mortgage business. It's booming at this time. I mean,
yep.
Everybody can get a mortgage. Anybody can buy $1 million home. Anybody can get anything that they want. The system was fatally flawed and tragically broken, and you found yourself right in the middle of it. Just in a minute's time, tell me what happened.
Well, yeah, like you said, everything was flowing. I'm a sales rep with them. Easy come, easy go with money. And I talk about in the book that happiness, my search for happiness and money became a way to create distractions. We could take a trip, buy a new car, buy a new house. To instead of dealing with what was on the inside, money became that avenue to numb some of the pain or distract me from my pain, but never really dealing with my pain. And so, yeah, it was easy coming. And obviously, it's going to crash coming up here in a few years. But there for a while, it was yeah, like you said, everybody get a mortgage just about. Money was easy come, easy go.
So the crash came, and you got caught up in a situation that was totally unexpected. Came under indictment. Were put in a position where you had to accept a plea deal, and that plea deal sent you to prison
Yes.
for a 14-month sentence. Uh, so it went from one tragedy to thinking that your escape route was going to lead you into joy and prosperity and to put you behind bars.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That was um, in the midst of the crash. Now all of a sudden I can't find happiness or distractions because I ain't got no money, so I
Right.
can't. Everything's crashing, and we moved back to Wichita. And it was at that point, again, sometimes we get so low that I said, all right, God, I don't know how you can take my brokenness and use it, but that call of God really just began to just come on fire inside of me. And I knew that there was a purpose and a plan. But we always expect, immediate answers, things to happen quick. And as I went back, we started attending a church, Believers Tabernacle, that um, I would actually, they would play a huge part in launching me back into ministry. But we just come back just as members there. And God, what is my call? What is my purpose? And for 18 months, I had that conversation, nearly daily. In my personal life, just things are God speaking to me daily. But when I'd ask, what is your plan? Complete silence. And it was driving me crazy because this on the inside, I'm on fire. I know that God has a plan for me. And I had a roadside encounter with God, driving down the road, heading to a sales call. I was still working a secular job at this point. And I'll never forget it, probably as close to an audible voice as I've ever heard. I'm having that same conversation. God, what is your plan? And I hear, you haven't given me everything. And we kind of sometimes we hear that stuff. We're like, "Hello, God, are you paying attention? Because we pretty well have lost everything. We pretty well just come through this, not much left." And he said, "You haven't given me everything. You haven't given me your son."
We're going to leave it right there before we go to break. We're talking with Rick Unruh, author of the new book, Self-Surrender, The Key to Dreaming Again. Chronicles his journey from his coming to faith to the death of his son, to his incarceration, and finding what the key to dreaming again is, and finding out what self-surrender is all about. We're going to find out what self-surrender is all about and how, after the death of his 12-year-old son, and after serving time in prison, that Rick Unruh can stand before you and say he can praise the Lord. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Rick Unruh, author of Self-Surrender, The Key to Dreaming Again. Rick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Rick, in the first segment, we navigated you meeting the woman of your dreams, having 3 beautiful boys with her, and the tragic loss of your 12-year-old son Landon to a four-wheeling accident, and then to kind of escape from the environment, the setting that all of it took place in, the reminders that were everywhere, to kind of start again, to start fresh. You joined the savings and loan banking industry and the mortgage banking business at the peak of mortgage banking, but got caught up in the broad net of prosecutions and looking at the wrongdoings of an industry gone bad. And wound up being sentenced to 14 years in a work camp. So you asked the question that everybody asks, why me, Lord? How did I get here? How can I get out of this? And actually, God doesn't want us to ask Him, how can we get out of it? God wants us to ask Him, what does He want us to get out of it? And you actually had that conversation with Him. What is it, Lord? What is it that you want me to do? What is it you want from me? What is it? What is it? And you heard an answer. And what answer was that?
So there we are sitting alongside the road. He says, "You haven't given me everything. You haven't given me your son." And of course, immediately, those blocks go back up. And I'm like, listen, there's a whole lot I don't understand about God and the loss of my son, how that all plays together. And I'm like, you know what? I've tucked that away in a box. I've locked it up. I've thrown the key away. I don't want to go back there. And I think so many of us have similar type of things that we have put in a box, locked it away, and it's those things that we're not willing to give to God. And so finally sitting alongside a road and tears coming down my face, visually in my mind, I finally surrendered and said, okay, God. I visually picked up my lifeless son. And I walked him to the foot of the cross and I said, here he is, God. Here's my greatest hurt. Here's my greatest pain. Here's my greatest question about who you even are. And I said these powerful words, God, if you can use my son for your glory, I'll do anything you ask me to do. And immediately, this Dream Again name, I'd never thought of it, that name comes to me. Some of the things that he now has in store for me and wants me to do and launch and start. And so all this is that pivotal moment, self-surrender, the key to dreaming again. What are we holding back from God? What are we not? Because that would have been a stumbling block to me down the road if I didn't deal with it.
Right.
I don't know why it took 18 months, but for whatever God knew, 18 months, I wasn't going to be ready to come to that point. And so now with all of that cleared out, now we can move forward and back into ministry with the calling God has on my heart. And I just know that, again, so many people, we don't want to go to that one area. But when we do, man, God begins to open up doors and open up amazing things. So I go and talk to my pastor, and we decide to open up the Dream Again Counseling Center. Life is great again. I'm still grieving. You still have those days and moments. But now my son's life has some meaning, is that I'm going to be able to use what we've been through to help other grieving parents, other grieving people who have lost loved ones. We're going to do counseling in general, but really an emphasis on the grieving part. So this begins to allow me to dream again, because when you lose a child, you don't think you'll ever understand passion again, because
Right.
you're just numb on the inside.
Rick,
But God has a plan for our life.
Let me share something with you that I think we'll find that you will get an answer to some question you've been asking. Why 18? Okay, 18 in Hebrew, the number 18 is every Hebrew letter has a value, and 18 translates to the word chai, C-H-A-I, chai, which means life. 18 means life. So you've seen people lift a cup and say l'chaim. You've seen movies, you see l'chaim, okay, to life. Okay, 18 is the number
Wow.
for life.
Wow.
That means chaim, life. So there's your answer as to you don't know why it took 18, because life was coming to you, and it was coming
that
to
is
you
so powerful.
as a new.
Wow.
It was coming to you as a new life. And you look at 2 Corinthians 5:17. You look at the words of Paul that says that anyone who's in Messiah is a new creation. So there's life. Rabbi Nicodemus asked the most marvelous of questions: how do I inherit the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus tells him, you must be born again. And that is new life in Messiah. And so here you are experiencing at the 18th month, the month when new life would begin. And It's God's numbers, and we know that. And people who might be watching might say, "Well, that's numerology. That's mysticism." No, you read in the book of Revelation that you will know the Antichrist by the number of his name. That means that God acknowledges the numbers. The number of his name shall be 666. So we go through the Hebrew alphabet, knowing each letter has a number assigned to it, has a value. And you have to find the combination in order to get to 666. Well, lots of people's names might be 666, but it's when that one rises up that makes a covenant with many, whose also name adds up to 666. Then you'll know that. So numbers are very important to God.
Yes.
Very important to God. So you have this vision, and the vision is a twofold vision. One is to dream again. Two is self-surrender. And one requires the other. And to dream again requires self-surrender. So tell me, what does self-surrender really mean?
Well, there's, again, so many things that we want to hand certain things to God. That surrender really is a military term, and I talk about that in the book, surrender. But a lot of times there's negotiations that go on with surrender. And I think we treat our Christian life the same way. God, I'll give you this, this, and this, but I kind of need to hang on to this. And we don't fully understand full self-surrender. God, I need you to take everything. There's no negotiations. You're calling something out in my life, then I need to surrender that to you. But it's hard because we've been ingrained with this. It's been something that's been part of us maybe for a long time. But yeah, that surrender, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. We think we surrender everything, when we come to Christ, but there's so much that, was still rooted in there that God just begins to root out. Are we willing to daily surrender, to continue to say, God, you're in control and I want all of you?
It kind of begs the question, let's turn this around. God says, I've surrendered all for you. I gave you all I had. I gave you my son, but you won't give me yours. I surrendered my son to pay the price for your sin, but you won't surrender your son into my loving hands. You've locked him away. You're holding him captive. And I sent my son to bind up the brokenhearted, and you are brokenhearted, and to set the captives free, and you were held captive. You understand. Lights out, the bars close, the key goes in the lock, you hear the clank, the sound that it makes, and you're separated from your family, and you are ashamed. You are navigating a road of what will life look like when this is over. Who would ever want to hire an ex-con? Who would ever want to hire this broken, down to nothing? And as my good friend Peter Rosenberger often says, it is when we put our scared hand into his scarred hand that he takes a hold of us and pulls us out of it. And you experience that, both in the natural and in the supernatural.
Yeah. And so we launched the counseling center in May of 2009, and it was just, wow, God, you still have a plan for my life, all this. 1 month later, I get the call from the FBI. And you go from this huge amount, all the struggle we've been through, all the questions and doubt and surrendering, and now I come here, I think I'm back on the mountain, I'm on the mountain to stay, and I can't even be there 1 month, and wham. And now I'm hit with what I see as a final blow. Okay, I'm already broken. Now I'm going to be labeled as a felon. I'm an embarrassment to my family. I'm ashamed of who I am, and all these things that the enemy tries to play. And I tell people the enemy always tries to label us by our greatest failure and our lowest points. You're an addict. You're divorced. You failed at business. You're a felon. And so the enemy always tries to keep our identity in that place instead of really realizing who we are in Christ. And so that was the battle now that begins, because I think I'm done. Who would hire a felon? What church would hire a felon? And so all of these things are going through my mind as I walk into, and that opening chapter of the book. This is a second play on, not play on words, but the second time I use a self-surrender. And because I'm told, I got a 14-month sentence, and I'm told to go self-surrender to Yankton Federal Prison Camp in Yankton, South Dakota. And my family and I drive up there, and I walk into the control center, and I say these words that I say end up being prophetic words. I had no idea at the time. I'm Rick Unruh, and I'm here to self-surrender. And over that course of time, now I got to realize I've got to self-surrender my shame, my embarrassment, my pride, because that's really at the heart of it. That how could I, being raised in a great home like I was, and all these great things, and now, to admit and just hand that over to Christ. Say, okay, my life is in your hands. You still have a plan for me. Nothing has changed in the big picture. But yeah, today it sure feels different. So now I come back to another, are you willing to surrender all these other things?
So you come to this crossroad, you surrender, and you served how much of the 14, was it 12 months?
I had a 15-month sentence. I was there 11 and a half months, just shy of a year, and then I was still on probation for a while.
So did the family go back home to the family home? How did your wife survive, or did she go back to the original Wichita to the families?
Yes. Okay. They went back to Wichita. They were able to come visit every 3 weeks. We had some great people that helped her make sure she was able to come up and visit, and all of that, 'cause financially it's a heavy load. I'm missing my youngest son's senior year of high school. That's brutal. That's been very tough, but God's putting everything into place. Our marriage, everything we've been through, it's never in danger, but you get this drifting that as you go through trauma. And this really allowed, being in prison, time for us to sit back down and write letters to each other and express some deep feelings. And there was great healing that came into place from a lot of that. So in the midst of all this other stuff, God is healing, moving things forward. And it becomes, I tell people, I never want to sign up for another tour duty, but I don't regret prison, because God used that time to do some incredible things in my life.
In prison, there were people that actually spoke into your life. There were actually encounters that you had that wound up becoming divine appointments, and you came out with a new view, a new set of lenses. Almost, God needed to take you out in order to dust you off, to take what was left of you, until you were basically now poured out and emptied. That everything that you had, that you held sacred, that you held near and dear, was basically stripped away from you, including your freedom. But God had another plan, and that plan was for you to leave not empty and broken, right? Believing you were empty and broken, but coming to find out that you were more healed and more full than you could have possibly imagined, and you could still be used of God in a supernatural way. And so how is God using you right now today?
So as I get out of prison and everything we learned there, and again, now this church that I talked about, we were attending, and we opened a counseling center they plugged me right back into the counseling center. We'd kept it going by using counselors that year. 9 months later, our executive pastor goes to be a campus pastor. 9 months out of prison at a fairly large church, I am now put in as an executive pastor. Um, I thought prison was the end of me, and yet prison actually sped things up for God's plan in my life. I was there for 5 years, an incredible time, incredible church, and then God started stirring in my heart. Rick, you've got this testimony of encouragement and hope that people need to hear, this dream again message. That when we think we're down and out, when we think that God can't restore our marriage and God can't, heal what we're facing, that we can dream again together. And so I resigned at the church to launch into traveling and speaking, sharing my testimony, which then, of course, led to the book that we have here. During the week, I'm also work with Mission America Placement Services. They have RVers that volunteer labor to go help build churches, and really cool. So it's allowed me to see people not just retire, but say, hey, dream again, go do something for the kingdom. And so it's an exciting time to see God put all the pieces together. And the times I thought I was down and out, but God always has a plan if we'll trust him.
Who were you thinking of when you wrote this book?
Obviously I have a huge heart for the grieving. And I hope they can take from that. And God's opened up some new layers now where sometimes the church misunderstands this grieving process, or it should just be a set time and then you're healed from it. So really part of that roadside encounter was we're now kind of doing workshops and trainings to help the church understand the grieving heart and how to minister to them better. So this is a new layer that's just opened up. But also, even when I share my message, it goes from the person who's battling addictions to think they can never be set free, to the marriage that's in trouble, to the pastor who's sitting on the front row, who's doing okay, but just needs to dream again, just needs that little boost of, yeah, you know what? I need to dream a little bit bigger. God still got this. So it really covers this wide array of people as I minister with that.
Well, if you've lost your ability to dream, Rick Unruh says that the key to dreaming again is self-surrender, is to give up your agenda for God's agenda, to give up your plans for God's plans, to set your personal desires aside and ask the Lord, what are you asking of me? And what he's asking you to do is to walk with him, not to do more for him, but to do more with him. That when Rick Unruh pulled his car over and on the side of the road, he asked the Lord, what do you want of me? What is it you want from me? He got a clear answer. And that's the same answer you're going to get. There's something you're holding back from God, and he wants it all because he gave all. He gave his best for you, and he wants you to give your best to him. And if you will self-surrender, if you will take that dark darling of your heart, that protected area, that one place you want to keep just for yourself, and release it into God's hands and lay it at the cross, then he will give you that key to be able to dream again. Rick Unruh, author of Self-Surrender, The Key to Dreaming Again. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.